Before spaceships and cruise ships made their way to our community, citrus and fishing were Brevard County's biggest industries, and net fishing was a profitable enterprise in the Indian River. In 1922, the fishing industry in Titusville was actually bigger than the citrus industry, and all you needed back then was a rowboat and oars to catch fish. By the 1950s, pier fishing had become a major activity for tourists as well as locals, and every coastal town had a fishing pier, including Titusville. My Thompson grandparents operated Titusville's fishing pier, and my family had the great fortune to live right next to the pier. When I was 11, my grandfather said something to me that was so profound, I've never forgotten it. We were standing on his pier, looking down the river at the cranes and barges and dredges used for building the NASA Bridge and Causeway. My grandpa said that all the new development is going to kill the river. He only had a 7th grade education, yet somehow he knew that causeways and growth were going to be very bad for the Indian River. That was about the same time my dad built a push net and started dropping me, the net, and a small rowboat off at Haulover Canal on summer days so I could catch shrimp for my grandfather to sell at his pier. That suited me just fine, as all I ever wanted to do was fish. I pushed that net through seagrass beds behind the Spoil Islands north of Haulover Canal, and I did catch a lot of shrimp. I made little traps so I could catch pigfish and sell them for bait too. I began using a long cane pole to splatter pole for spotted sea trout. Then I built 150 crab traps and started running crab traps every afternoon after school. Back then, it didn't matter where you put a trap in the water, it would always have crabs the next day. When I was 17, my grandfather co-signed for my first bank loan, and I bought 500 yards of gill net and a bow runner boat so I could fish for mullet. Being on the river was a magical time for me. The water was crystal clear, and close to shore, the bottom was carpeted with a never-ending panorama of rippling, waving seagrass. A walk along any shoreline revealed fiddler crabs as far as I could see. When I approached, they raced toward their holes with a whispery whoosh, and the motion of hundreds of fiddler crabs running for cover looked like water parting as I moved along the shore. With the coming of spring, hordes of bigger crabs made their presence known, as any sandy beach with a hard onshore wind was covered with spawning horseshoe crabs. Flocks of hungry shorebirds gorged on their eggs, gaining weight for their long-distance flights to the Arctic tundra to nest. I didn't know it then, but I was experiencing the end of the grandeur of the Indian River before my grandfather's prophecy came true. To accommodate America's race to the moon, 2 big environmental alterations were executed on the Merritt Island landscape, both of which caused dreadful damage to the Indian River Lagoon system. This 1950s brochure from the Happy Creek Hunting and Fishing Lodge shows an open water connection between the Indian River and Banana River through Banana Creek. The oysters were so thick in Banana Creek and its tributaries, homeowners had docks over the oyster beds in order to reach open water. In fact, one of the waterways was actually named Oyster Prong. Major changes happened to this landscape in the 1960s. Banana Creek was severed by a dirt causeway that replaced the humpback bridge, and a crawlerway that was built for transporting Apollo rockets blocked the eastern end of Banana Creek. That action isolated the middle portion of Banana Creek. Giant holes were dredged in the Banana River and its salt marshes for fill. Channels were cut so that barges could reach the vehicle assembly building and other locations. Dikes were built around the salt marshes for mosquito control, creating large impoundments that separated the marshlands from their lifeblood of salty lagoon waters. Cutting off Banana Creek changed the hydrology of how water moves in the estuaries. Historically, when the wind blew out of the south, water was pushed up into the northern Banana River and then westward through Banana Creek and into the Indian River. With a north wind, the water in the Banana River was pushed south, and water from the Indian River rushed eastward through Banana Creek to fill the void. Lagoon water sloshing back and forth like this helped to flush the two estuaries. These images from the mid-1960s show the crawlerway and Launchpad 39A. Stark white sand clearly reveals how much Banana River bottom was dumped onto pristine marshes and waterways. Sadly, these once productive waters that were so full of life are now dead zones, altered forever with no regard for the environment. Billions of filter feeding oysters and clams disappeared. NASA's other big environmental impact was the construction of well over 100 miles of earthen berms around its salt marshes. In the early days of KFC development, mosquitoes were so bad that outside work was nearly impossible. So they used drag lines to cut ditches around the perimeters of salt marshes and piled the dirt to make dikes. Water levels could then be controlled and pesticides sprayed over the surface to keep more than 20 species of Merritt Island mosquitoes from breeding. DDT was mixed with warm diesel oil, vaporized, and sprayed from planes and trucks. By the early 1970s, years of rainfall transitioned the impoundments from salt marsh into freshwater ponds, destroying the ability of the salt marshes to act as lungs and kidneys and nurseries for the lagoon. Nearly 80% of the salt marshes that once rimmed the Indian River were turned into impoundments for mosquito control, most of which were within Kennedy Space Center and the surrounding wildlife refuge and national seashore. And you can see how, this very special place acts as a gigantic recharge area for the rest of the lagoon. Look at the salt marshes up around the Space Center versus, the impoundments that did happen down in the southern part of the lagoon. It is massive what happened up here. So it's imperative that these impoundments are protected during new development at the Space Center. Even if all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and chemicals are removed from the stormwater, industrial wastewater, and sound suppression deluge water, excessive freshwater itself, just by itself, freshwater is an estuary pollutant. Too much freshwater entering the impounds will be disastrous for seagrasses and animals. Excessive freshwater triggers egg hatching failure for important fish like sea trout and redfish, and it slows or may even stop seagrass growth. Prior to reconnection to the river, these impoundments were home only to different kinds of minnows, but there was a few bass out there. I knew where some good bass fishing were, but it was mostly minnows. After reconnecting the salt marshes, reconnecting the impoundments to the river, more than 60 species are utilized in the impoundments, including many valuable commercially and recreationally harvested species. Fishing improved, and for a few years, we were able to market the Space Coast as the redfish capital of the world. Numerous television fishing shows were filmed here, and multiple redfish tournaments took place every single year. But then in 2010, the blue-green algae bloom kicked off the river's cycle of rainbow-colored recurring blooms, accompanied by a near total loss of seagrasses. There hasn't been a fishing tournament held or a TV show filmed here in years. Currently, new businesses at the Space Center are obtaining permits from Florida DEP to discharge excess stormwater and treated industrial wastewater into canals that empty into Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge impoundments, specifically oyster prong. That's just wrong. Seagrasses provide prime habitat for fish, crabs, and other marine life and are considered a key barometer of an estuary's overall health. Seagrass meadows are the foundation for the astonishing diversity of life found in the Indian River Lagoon. A single acre of seagrass can support 40,000 fish and 50 million small invertebrates such as shrimp, crabs, oysters, and snails. In order to thrive, seagrasses need salinity above 20 parts per thousand. Prior to the algae blooms of 2010, most of the healthy seagrass beds in Brevard County were located within Kennedy Space Center, the Wildlife Refuge, and the seashore. If that map on the right-hand side was from 2019 instead of 2021, it would show 0 seagrass in Mosquito Lagoon. But that's where the seagrass came back first. Today, more than 90% of the lagoon shorelines are hard armored with vertical seawalls and piles of rocks. It's impossible for seagrass to grow near hardened shorelines. Most of the sandy shorelines that remain lie within this very special area in northern Brevard, Kennedy Space Center and its surrounding wildlife refuge and national seashore. You might think that some of these fish are strictly offshore species, but all of these highly recognizable animals spend the early part of their lives in the seagrass meadows of estuaries, including the Indian River. A healthy lagoon and a robust national wildlife refuge are crucial for the survival of more than 300 species of birds that live in or migrate through our area. This slide says it all. We need an entity that is made up of citizens and government officials that can plan a future that includes a healthy and managed Indian River Lagoon. Brevard County citizens are spending $500 million to fix the lagoon. They're reaching far beyond what the bare minimum of the law requires. Interests at the Space Center should be good neighbors and do the same. Thank you.